Okay, we are back in Kerbal Space Program. I'm feeling surprisingly generous today. I've actually launched 2 rockets for this video. First of all, a carbon copy of the one I launched yesterday, thanks to the crashing issues I was experiencing. And second, this probe, the expendable probe, which we're going to be using for some orbital manoeuvring. This particular one is a carbon copy of my mapping probes, and as such, generates a map. I don't tend to use too many mods when I actually fly my spaceships. I have a few, but I tend to leave it fairly unmodded. But the Insurance Space Agency mapping satellites are by far the best things ever. They, as you can see here, generate a map of whatever you're going to be orbiting. In this case, I have several mapping satellites in orbit. This polar mapping satellite, a slightly wider orbit mapping satellite, and now this one. However, this mapping satellite is in orbit far too low to actually be useful, something I intend to rectify today, and in the process demonstrate orbital manoeuvring for you. Right, first things first, we need to be in map view. I'm going to have a look at the Aphelion, Apoaps, whatever you want to call it, Apkerbian, I suppose. Click on your orbit and you'll see add maneuver and a time. Let's add a maneuver. 3 axes, 6 possible choices. Our options are simple. I'll demonstrate them all to come, but first of all, we're in an elliptical orbit at the moment, so if we go to the Apoaps, we can, if we go in the prograde direction, so same symbols there in the nav ball, prograde direction, we can, if we speed up in the prograde direction, we will increase the periaps quite nicely. And because we know that was the apoaps, if we tweak it carefully, when it's about 90 degrees round, we've pretty much got a circular orbit. That's quite handy. And we don't need a huge amount of delta V for this, so what I'm going to do is jettison our big old fuel tank at the bottom. Because without it we're a bit more manoeuvrable. And we're looking for our prograde direction. There it is. Of course, our prograde direction at the moment doesn't make a huge amount of sense, because what we want to be looking for is that. Because at the moment our prograde direction is pointing in the direction of our orbit. Not entirely surprisingly. That's ahead of us. What I instead want is this direction, which will be prograde in about 7 minutes' time. So I'm kind of just using... I haven't got any RCS on this, no reaction control. Again, I don't think the satellite's really heavy enough to warrant it. I don't need to do a huge amount of fine manoeuvring. So the reaction wheels and the advanced SAS work quite nicely. So I'm doing live commentary for this, which I don't tend to do for Kerbal Space Program, just so I know, well, just so I can actually, what's the words? Just so I don't do live commentary for this, certainly, so I can know how long I can speak about each and every subject, rather than, as I do in post, just sort of video this randomly and hope I've got enough time to talk. Don't appear to have our engine set up. There we go, there is our engine active. And we are still a fair way out. 6 minutes, let's speed up some time. So our chunk of hull is flying away nicely. Now, one thing you'll have spotted, eagle-eyed observers, is that I've now passed the time for my burn. This is because the maneuver presumes you'll deliver all your delta V, all your change of velocity, in that instant. If you're using something like a nuclear drive or an ion engine, this is never going to happen. I've got a slightly more flexible liquid drive here. The main difference between them, of course, being that the while the ion drive and the nuclear rocket are you get much more power out of each unit of fuel, it delivers that power much more slowly. For example, the giant rocket, which is currently drifting away from us, the previous stage, is incredibly inefficient, but puts that power down a lot faster, which is why I use it to take off. An engine like this, or the nuclear ion engines, is incredibly inefficient, but a heck of a lot better when you're in space. Right, so now we have a fairly 187, 190, a fairly circular orbit. But in order to get a decent amount of mapping, at the moment we're just literally doing a line around the middle. What we want to do is, and I don't think I need a particular point for this one, bring up the inclination. And there we go. So you can see it's brought out the apoapse as well, because I'm going to have to, thrust to get there. So bring that down. Instantly fire your engines at the apoapse to move up. You can also fire them at the periapse to move the apoapse down, and vice versa, which I'll demonstrate in a minute. Fast forward across to there. Well, this is a kind of maneuver known as a Hohmann transfer. I've probably pronounced that incredibly badly, but it's the Hohmann transfer orbits. They're the cheapest way of getting a rocket from place to place, essentially, or from orbit to orbit. You make your orbit more elliptical by burning at one end, and when you get to the other end, you burn again to make it circular again. You have a nice, easy, well done orbital transfer. We're now behind the planet. We've increased our inclination a fair bit. I'm not going to go the whole way, because that's where I'm just trying to show off the manoeuvres here. The other option in our manoeuvre window, so we've done inclination up, inclination down, prograde, retrograde, which we'll do a bit more later. These ones, eccentricity, as far as I can see. As far as I can tell, it keeps your same major axis, your average your average distance of the planet, but increases the amount of eccentricity you have in your orbit, so you can be, well, more or less eccentric. And what I'm going to do now is abuse this a little to show you the final orbital maneuver, which is only doable around planets like Kerbin. The key is air. So I bring in the periapse. Periapse? I'm sure it's periapse. Helps if I don't have a space probe in the way. It's the problem of having a decent number of spacecraft. And as you can see, I'm going to bring our periapse down to about 58. Eagle Eye observers may point out the atmosphere, in fact, begins at 60. Which it does. What we're going to do is we're going to hopefully skim the edge of the atmosphere a bit and do some aerobraking. How hard can that be? It's 5 minutes away. Looks like we have sunset coming up. There it is. Sunset, sunrise. Obviously. So we've got a minute to go. I'm going to burn the engines. It looks like we've got 350 meters per second. So let's burn the engines about now. And we're going to move this orbit in. See, the apoapse is moving out steadily. Periapse is moving in slightly less steadily. Because of the orbits, we can't do just turn in a direction and go. We have to plan and do the maths a little. So I'm just going to keep burning, keep burning, keep burning. until that gets to around 60-ish, where I'm going to jump out of map view, because there's a bit of, in my case, a little bit of thinking time required. Just getting a little geriatric. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, let's cut the engine. And with any luck, I'm going to click on there and cancel that manoeuvre. 56. And we're going to get there in 7 minutes' time. Next thing's next, I am going to stow these panels. And the most important thing at aerobraking, always have the heaviest bit of your ship go first. Which in this case is the engine. Oh, I have a bit of thinking. It might be the fact I'm running fraps, and it might not in fact be a problem at all in the actual final video. So when do we drop below 60? Probably about... I'm going to add a manoeuvre in here, in which I'm not going to do anything. What that's doing is just giving me a bit of time. It's giving me a time until... well, time till something happens. So I'm going to move in. It's dropping, 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 dropping. Still dropping. Fair enough, we're not going to stop dropping anytime soon. So we're now travelling at 2.5 kilometers a second. Still about a minute to go until that point. Okay, we're approaching the edge of the atmosphere now. Looks like we hit the edge of the atmosphere around 64. So it's probably 65 high. No, I don't think we went to the atmosphere close enough. Yeah, I think we need a bit more. Yeah, so let's slow down a bit. Let's drop that periaps even further. .56. Yeah, so not quite deep enough in the atmosphere to get a huge amount of burning going on. So it might be a case of lowering it to around 45 kilometers. Deep enough in the atmosphere that we start suffering some serious amounts of slowdown. As it is, our apoapse is still coming in due to our atmospheric drag. Bringing that down, bringing that down. The flaw with an aerobrake is if you get it wrong, obviously you go slamming into the planet. If you miss the atmosphere, you're going to go staying out of the planet. Okay, we've now passed periaps. So we're now sailing up to our new apoapse of 277. But the problem is, what we have now is a decaying orbit. So unless we burn our engines again at our new orbital height, we're going to keep skimming the atmosphere and getting slower and slower and lower and lower as we go down, 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 and eventually burn up and disintegrate. Well, I say burn up and disintegrate, but we're just going to burn up and then slam into the ground, because they haven't really fitted heating yet. But yes, that's the basics of orbital maneuvering. So, if we switch to our probulator, which hopefully looks a bit familiar, almost but not quite exactly like its predecessor. Oh, we could have remembered to open it, so exactly like its predecessor. We're going to do a particular kind of orbital maneuver. Step 1, we're going to pick the moon. And at some point, we're going to pick a point in the orbit. We're going to burn the engine, so we have a lot of engine left. Bring that out, bring that out. Oh, that's handy. What we have there, this symbol here, is we've started to encounter the moon. And it's a good 4-hour long encounter with the moon. That's almost perfect. Unintentional, but perfect. Dumb luck. Okay. Let's do this then. We've got plenty of fuel. It's an 800 meters per second burn. We have a gigantic engine that's more than capable of doing that. If not, we have a spare engine underneath that, which was more than capable of doing that as well. We're probably going to need that when we get to the moon. Okay. There we go. We're lined up. It's 12 minutes to burn. In previous editions of KSP spacecraft, it was fairly easy to tell. Well, the best way to tell before orbital maneuvering was a thing. Generally, when the moon rises over the horizon, point at it and go. But in this case, we can actually now plot, using advanced Kerbal science, exactly when we should burn. Of course, we'll probably need some mid-course maneuverings, but here it is, there's the moon rising, and there's indeed 30 seconds to go, and it's going to be into the sunrise as well by the look of it. All things considered, I couldn't have planned this better if I tried. So let's bring the engine up. So we've brought the engine up, we are burning away. Well away from Kerbin. Probably bring the engine down a bit, in fact. Just because we don't miss our node too badly. Let's see. Okay, we're now hit our node. We're going to bring that engine up to maximum power and be done with it. Actually, I say maximum. I tend not to bring the giant engine up to maximum at all. These ones have a fairly infamous overheating problem. Bring them up to almost were, but almost maximum is completely fine. Alright. Now, as you can see, our orbit has got strange. Let's turn that maneuver off. Okay. What it is now showing is we are flying to the moon. We're going to have an encounter with the moon, leave the moon, and then be on this new orbit. We're going to essentially get a gravitational slingshot into this entirely new orbit. We don't want to do that, we want to ideally stop somewhere around the moon. Ah, and there's a pretty sunrise. Let's admire that for a second. But I think I'm going to take us up to mid-course lunar correction. And in the last video, we're going to actually go to the moon. Or at least get to the moon. So we're going to burn our way quite happily. First time in any of these videos, I'm going to go up to 100 times. We've now left all of my little low Kerbal orbit things around. We're now deep into space. Again, because we're going to drop the maximum power stage. Burn away from it a little bit. I could have installed little the miniature solid boosters around the back here just to automatically throw us away, but as ever, every ton, every kilogram of mass you add, you have to then bring into orbit. So might as well just use the main engine. It's only a tiny little burn. Well, it looks like we're going to approach the moon quite successfully. Yeah, I think we're on the way. So basically speaking, I think I'm going to leave this video here, and we'll catch up with our lunar probe in the next video. But ideally, we'll approach that strange and enigmatic sphere and hopefully have a look at it. Hopefully quite close up. Even more hopefully, without exploding in the process. Time will tell.